Hello and thanks for watching this Life Solved short. I'm Robin Montague, and in these videos we get to meet the University of Portsmouth researchers who are sharing their work in the latest series of the Life Solved podcast. Now this is work that's changing our world for the better in all sorts of ways. If you're outside of specific communities, you might not have heard of Chemsex. But the modern day use of drugs to enhance a sexual experience has its more complex side, and there are those who are either trying to leave the world or are in, for want of a better word, recovery. Joining me today is Veronika Carruthers, who's lecturer in Victimology and Criminal Justice at the University of Portsmouth, and Ignacio Labayen de Inza, CEO of the charity controlling Chemsex. And we'll be exploring what Chemsex is, the harms it potentially causes to individuals, and what can be done to keep people safe. So thank you both very much for joining me today. So let's start with a question that I imagine most people who are watching this have in their mind. What is Chemsex and how would you define it?
So the term chemsex has been it's not necessarily a new term that has come to light. It's been around for a long time within the community. But since 2010, it was coined officially for research purposes. And essentially, the best way to describe it is particular individuals, most commonly gay men or men who have sex with men, who use specific substances such as crystal methamphetamine, methadone, GHB, GBL in order to enhance their sexual experiences.
And you said it's been around for quite some time. Was there a particular time in history where it really sort of kicked off and there were more people getting involved in chemsex?
So I think if you look at it from a historical perspective, the time of sex, drugs and rock and roll, within all communities was quite prominent. And since then, sex and drugs have had a big influence within all communities. And within the male gay community, there's always been substances that have circulated. So I don't necessarily think it's something new, but the substances that have been used definitely change and adjust based on availability, popularity and time.
And what would you say is the main attraction towards, engaging in chemsex? Because I suppose a lot of people say, it must be just, the high, the quick hit, but actually a lot of it's down to the experience, I suppose, the bigger picture.
Yes, so it's quite complex, and I think once again it's important to understand the historical development of the LGBTQ community. Historically, we have been oppressed and people have had to go underground, so to speak, and participate and try to be themselves in a community which is trying to accept them. Once people are sort of driven underground, there's also an element of shame and stigma that comes with chemsex and within the male gay community in particular. If you look at the HIV epidemic, gay sex was stigmatized even further. And I think a lot of people within the community did have that self-shame and internal homophobia regarding themselves. And often the use of these substances can really help overcome that. A lot of these substances increase confidence, they increase your libido, they make you feel carefree, and it's an escape mechanism for a lot of these people and an environment where they feel accepted and they can be themselves. So I think a lot of it stems from that, from a historical perspective. And I think recently what we're seeing more today is it's just more and more accessible, with social media coming to play, Grindr having a massive impact on availability and accessibility of not just drugs, but also sexual partners. It has become more popular and more common within the community. So I think there are various different aspects. Some people may choose to participate in chemsex with appropriate knowledge and voluntarily, and some people may perhaps do it in order to cover up certain internal feelings of shame and stigma.
Ignacio, why do you think people tend to engage in chemsex then, or certain communities?
Well, there are many reasons why people engage in chemsex. There are here in the UK, which is not necessarily what is happening in other areas in the world, but here in the UK, the drugs that people use are drugs that are making people very confident and sexy and attractive. You don't feel scared that someone is going to touch you here and is going to think, oh, he's a little bit fat. Or you don't feel scared thinking, I'm going to be rejected. So there are many elements. There are elements related to self-esteem, lots of problems with loneliness, need of connection, problems with intimacy, problems, psychosexual issues, people who are using chems because they are struggling, for example, with premature ejaculation. And my whole life, my sex life has been very embarrassing, but if I take something, I'm not going to ejaculate after 2 minutes, and that makes me feel more relaxed because for once I found a solution, and it can be about painful sex, it can be about lack of libido. So there are many reasons why people are doing chems.
Obviously now there seems to be, well, it appears to be, looking at news articles and stuff, St John's Ambulance I think put something out fairly recently saying there's been a spike in the use of Chemsex in London, so the capital city, and it makes people think, why now? But when you mentioned human connection, is that just maybe because, I don't know if there's a relationship there between what we've gone through over the past few years and not having that human connection and coming out of it, and now people finding a lot of what you were saying sounds as it's about insecurities about ourselves, and it's fair to say they have been fairly heightened post-pandemic or after the last couple of years. So why do you think we're starting to see these stories circulate in the media saying there's been a spike, for instance, in chemsex?
Well, I have been supporting people struggling with chemsex since 2008, working in different services in London, but on average I have been meeting around 14, 15 people a week for years. We've met thousands of people. Also, I'm going to say a survivor because, I don't know why I'm alive, but I was struggling with chemsex for 3 years myself. I was doing G every day and night for that period of time. I was smoking meth practically every day. I was injecting at least 2 or 3 times a week. And things have been changing a lot since I started. I remember I started working in a charity called Antidote here in London. And when I started, everything was about people coming, presenting problems with alcohol, cocaine, sometimes ecstasy. A few of them was about heroin. I'm talking about the only LGBT charity that at that point was operating in the UK with drugs and alcohol issues. And suddenly we started to see a different change. Also, people were coming, presenting different issues, people who were overdosing. The gay community wasn't actually using heroin. The gay community was actually using drugs that help people to connect. I'm talking about ecstasy, I'm talking about cocaine. And in the beginning of the 20th century, 2000, 2005, 2010, then is when new drugs came out. And these drugs were these drugs that make people feel very confident. GHB has 2 main problems. One of them is physical dependency. So if you get used to take that, you cannot stop, otherwise you have withdrawal symptoms. The gay community wasn't experiencing that before that. It was like the perfect storm.
And Ronnie, just adding to what Ignacio was just saying about the types of drugs that we're seeing circulating around certain types of communities, they have changed quite significantly over the last couple of years compared to what maybe people remember in like the 80s or the 90s. Do you agree? Is that a big part to play in why things maybe now people don't really know what they're taking?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's similarly to the history that I was saying, the development of the apps and the new substances that come to the market. So most of the substances or new substances that come to the market are classified as NPS, so new psychoactive substances. And once these are, so to speak, abused in a certain way, then they do eventually make the legal system for illegality. And because there are so many new substances hitting the market daily, it is difficult for people to actually keep track of what they are using and what they are taking. A lot of these substances are much stronger than substances that we would have seen perhaps 30, 40 years ago. Ecstasy and cocaine can quite easily be checked now with drug testing kits, but the new substances often aren't detected, and it's very difficult to understand what it is that you're taking, especially when every single new drug coming onto the market either looks like a crystal or a new powder. They all look the same. You could look at 5 different powders. One of them could be flour, the other one could be cocaine, the other one could be methadone, and without understanding the drugs fully, you might not know what it is that you are taking. GHB, up until very recently, wasn't actually illegal, and it can still be purchased online nowadays. If you know how to use it correctly, then it can be taken. And I think GHB in particular is probably one of the most high-risk substances, shall we say. This mostly due to, like Ignacio said, the high dependency rate, but also the overdose risk. The amount that somebody should actually use in order to have a safe experience is anywhere from 0.5 to 1.5 milliliters. Now, this all depends on your height, on your build, on your experience, and also the dosing should be quite, there should be large periods of time between dosing. And people often don't know these very basic steps and will use a lot all at once. And the overdose risk is very high. Now, once you're in a situation where there are a lot of people using drugs at the same time, not only are you already feeling ashamed of your situation, but the drugs are illegal. The chances of people wanting to call ambulances for help is very, very low, which is a real shame, because if I could, say anything to people is really would be to ask for help. Help will be given to you. You won't necessarily be in trouble for using the substance or for taking that substance in that moment with the hospital. And encourage others to call for help if they're in a situation where somebody is experiencing an overdose or what we would call as going under. The signs are very similar to a heroin overdose in terms of, blue fingertips or blue lips, and generally being unconscious. And if that information can be given to paramedics at the scene, it's really, really key, because unfortunately, in the UK, as of right now, if you are admitted to hospital with an overdose, toxicology is usually undertaken. And that toxicology can consist of over 300 different substances, but GHB or GBL often isn't included in that. And so it's a real key issue or real key element to be able to inform paramedics that GHB has been consumed, because then appropriate support can be given. Without that, it can be very, very, very risky, and especially in regards to fatal overdoses, GHB is most prominent within the chemsex community. So that one is definitely the riskiest, shall we say. So it's about informing these individuals how to operate within the community, how to keep themselves safe. Not necessarily, I'm not going to sit here and tell people to stop using what they are using, but in order to, if you are going to use, then to make sure that you use safely, and that you know how to provide appropriate support should it need to be given.
And all of that just demonstrates the importance of knowledge and understanding what you're taking, what are the risks that could come alongside what you're taking. But access to help, it's not, I suppose there's a lot of services out there that support people for, drug addiction, alcohol addiction and so on. But this is not necessarily niche, but I think it involves a certain level of understanding of the chemsex community to be able to give that information and that support that's needed. Controlling Chemsex obviously is a charity that does that. How unique is Controlling Chemsex, Ignacio, in terms of being a charity that supports people struggling with chemsex or involved in chemsex generally? Are you quite unique?
I created in 2018, 2019 a document with David Stewart, who was my manager at Dean Street, and we were very close friends. He was the number one chemsex activist until he passed in 2021. And we created a document about first aid, how to react when things go wrong in a chemsex scenario. And what I did was, as an activist, I created a profile on Grindr just to deliver the link to this document. And it was huge. I mean, in 1 year, I think I received maybe 13,000 messages from people on Grindr asking for many, many things, not just from the link, people who were asking for support because I don't know how to support my partner and I would like to get some help, or people who were looking for information that they couldn't find because they said, but every time you go look for information about chemsex, everything is about the drugs that people use, why people do it, and I know all that, but what I don't know is how can I manage my cravings, how can I reconnect with sober sex, and And I contacted the 5 biggest organizations in London to professionalize that. And now I really care. I spoke with their CEOs. I went with evidence. They really wanted to do anything. And the reason why Controlling Chemsex started was because the need was there. We are the only people in the world who are offering support on Grindr and Scruff, the most popular gay hookup apps. So we can support people from anywhere. We are supporting. It's incredible. Years ago, Chemsex was in London. Now you get messages from people who live in a very tiny place in Northumberland.
Yeah, if I can just add to that. So, I just want to sort of echo everything that Ignacio has been saying. And I think at the start, you mentioned that certain organisations are starting to post about chemsex and that it is more prevalent. Unfortunately, that's not the case. It's been prevalent for a long, long time now, and it's actually only now that agencies and services are actually catching up with the idea that chemsex is a phenomenon within our society and that we need to have appropriate support services for these individuals. I was actually informed about controlling chemsex through one of my research participants, and that's how Ignacio and I got talking together. And the fact that controlling chemsex is online and that anybody can access it is so important, because a lot of what my research focuses on is trying to shed light on the fact that a lot of services within our country are postcode specific, and unless you live in a community or in a big city where there is a large LGBTQ community and drug counselling services and sexual health clinics have that awareness and that acceptance of individuals who might be participating in chemsex, the support is extremely limited. A lot of the times, if you live in London, if you live in Brighton, or Manchester or Newcastle, larger cities like that have the capacity to provide support. But people who come from small communities, small towns, small villages, sometimes they even know the people that they are accessing support from, or there are connections there. There is that fear of, is that person truly going to understand where I am coming from? Do they truly understand the world that I live in? And do they truly are they truly aware on how to appropriately provide that support? Like Ignacio was saying, there is more to it than simply providing harm reduction in the sense of clean needles, needle exchange programs, having one-to-one sessions. It needs to go beyond that. That element of drug use and sexual experiences need to be combined, because currently we have drug counselling services that exist and they can address an element of the issue, and we have sexual health clinics that exist and that they can address an element of the issue. But Controlling Chemsex is one of the only sort of online services that provides that. So, I really want to congratulate them for all their work. And a lot of the participants that I spoke to are aware of the charity, no matter where they live within the UK, and have found it extremely helpful. But I think what we need to focus on now is appreciating that there are other services that do incorporate that element of chemsex support, but how can we expand that and provide that training, and that's something that I worked on as well. When I worked with the NHS as a recovery worker, I did start to provide that training, and people did find it extremely helpful because often it is a world that they have never visited before. So I think it's important that we start talking about it, but I think it's also key not to call this a new phenomenon, because it's not that new. It's been around for a long time. We've been talking about it for a long time within the community, and the more we can normalize it and it become a topic of conversation, become something that we can perhaps talk about in schools as well, part of sexual education, I think that will be really, really important, and people will just be more aware of it and how to handle it should they find themselves within that situation.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much for talking with me. Clearly the work that both of you are doing, you can see it's making an impact, and hopefully it continues to do that. On the face of it, chemsex can look simply like a drug problem or a choice of sexual activity, but the wider culture that surrounds it and the history of the LGBTQ+ communities make it much more complicated, as we've heard today. And the result is more people end up at risk than should be the case, so hopefully better access to help and support is on the horizon. If you have been affected by anything that we've been discussing today, you can find resources and help at controllingchemsex.com. And if you'd like to listen to the full version of this episode of Life Solved, head to the University of Portsmouth website or download it on your favourite podcast app now. Just click the link in the comments box below or head to port.ac.uk/research to find out more. Next time, we look at the reality of CSI. When it comes to solving crimes, how realistic are the investigations that we're seeing on the screen compared to real-life crime scene investigation? Join us then.